During the history of Westeros, many have fought, failed and died to sit on the Iron Throne.
When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. There is no middle ground.
And of those that actually had a chance to rule, most did not deserve to do so. Most left the realm worse than when they ascended the throne.
Leave her face. I like her pretty.
And even those who started out with the potential to be great rulers often became corrupted or were broken by the weight of the crown. I quite enjoyed the first episodes of House of the Dragon, and the Dance of Dragons that we will probably see in a couple seasons is one of the most violent, intriguing and exciting periods in the history of Westeros. Full of George R. Martin's favorite kind of characters, or what he calls grey characters, who have both good and evil inside of them. But although I'm very excited to see these events visualized on screen, what I want to talk about in this video are not the characters that destroyed the Targaryen dynasty, but the one that built it. The one king that sat the Iron Throne for 55 years, forged a period of peace and prosperity, and was universally loved and respected. I want to explore what we can learn from the rule of Jaehaerys I, also known as Jaehaerys the Conciliator, and of course later in his life, the Old King. In their book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, Robert Moore and Douglas Gilette explore 4 archetypes of masculinity, each with its own characteristics and behaviors that shape a healthy, mature masculinity. In these 4, the King archetype or Father archetype is the most important and combines the 3 other archetypes in perfect harmony. As they write, it is masculinity in its fullest potential, the closest one can come to divinity. But maybe because it is the most important central archetype, it is also the hardest to develop, and therefore so few have realized its potential both in our real history and the fictionalized history of Westeros. And I want to argue that King Jaehaerys is the first and only king of Westeros to fully embody this archetype. And what is even more impressive, he did so for a lifetime.
I am the king! I will punish you.
But in order to understand what makes him possibly the greatest king of Westeros, we must first understand what makes a bad king by exploring the shadow archetypes, the tyrant and the weakling. Now, plenty of rulers have embodied the Tyrant King. Sometimes we see the Tyrant King already present in childhood. This child is described as the high chair tyrant. He or she is petulant, entitled and demanding. The high chair tyrant feels himself to be the center of the universe and holds unreasonable expectations for how the world and everyone in it should cater to his or her needs.
Everyone is mine to torment. You do well to remember that, you little monster.
As the child develops into the Tyrant King, he becomes a narcissistic ruler that instead of serving and blessing his subjects, he seeks to hurt and destroy. He sees his own power as fragile and finite and therefore sees any criticism as a threat to his authority, which causes him to lash out with physical and/or emotional abuse.
After I raise my armies and kill your traitor brother, I'm going to give you his head as well.
The other shadow side of the king archetype is the weakling. The weakling is scared of the responsibilities of being king. He is not decisive and would rather abdicate the throne to others, often his mother or father, and have to make the decisions over his realm and his life. The most clear example in Game of Thrones is of course sweet Tommen. Although much nicer than Joffrey, his weakness is also destructive to the realm. Now, although the weakling and the tyrant seem opposing archetypes, they are very much tied to each other. Under every tyrant cowers a scared weakling, and inside every weakling is a tyrant waiting to come out. One of the reasons that Jaehaerys became such a great king is that at a very early age he learned from the pitfalls of both shadow archetypes. His own father, Jaehaerys, lost the throne due to his weakness and indecisiveness, as is written in Fire and Blood. King Jaehaerys sought always to please. When faced with difficulties, he answered with soft words. He was easily influenced, swaying this way and that like a reed in the wind, likely to head the counselor that was lost in his ear, infamous for his indecision. The primary difficulty that Aenys faced during his rule was the Fate Militant and their disgust of the Targaryen tradition of brothers and sisters marrying. Everywhere in the country rebellion started against him by the warrior sons and forefellows, and many great houses joined them as they saw the king's weakness, and they started thinking back on a time before Aegon the Conqueror when they were kings. And in the end, it wasn't even battle or blood that killed the king, it was the stress of sitting the Iron Throne. Now upon his death, Aenys' brother Maegor the Cruel immediately claimed the throne. He was the opposite of his brother and immediately started a brutal war against the Fate Militant using his father's dragon, Balerion the Black Dread. Anyone who would oppose him would be slaughtered or burned, and often innocent small folk who were in the wrong place at the wrong time would die as well. He also killed all the workers that finished the Red Keep in order to keep the building secrets. His cruelties, in combination with constant increasing of taxes to pay for his wars, set the entire realm against him. He was also said to be cursed as he could not produce an heir, even with various different wives. And then Jaehaerys, the last living son of King Aenys, rose up against him and claimed the throne. Because the realm was so against him by this point, all his bannermen left him and Maegor died sitting on the Iron Throne during the night. He was found the next day with his wrists slashed, the exact cause of his death unknown. So when Jaehaerys ascended the throne at only 14, he had watched his father lose it because of weakness, and his uncle because of tyranny. His was no easy task, for his immediate predecessors had undone much of what Aegon the Conqueror had built. Aenys through weakness and indecision, Maegor with his bloodlust and cruelty. The realm Jaehaerys inherited was impoverished, war-torn, lawless and ridden with division and mistrust. The new king was a green boy with no experience of rule, but the young king was determined to learn from the mistakes of his father and uncle. At 14, Jaehaerys was not of an age to rule, so his mother would serve as queen regent for 2 years. However, the boy proved from the first that he would not be content to sit meekly by while others ruled in his name. Right from the beginning, the boy insisted upon having a voice in all decisions made in his name. Firstly, Jaehaerys forgave the lords that had rallied around Maegor. There will be no trials or executions, he said. I will not begin my reign bathing in blood. Some came to my banners early, others late. Let it rest now. His mother and his hand, Rhaegar Baratheon, advised him against this, afraid the lords of the realm would see Jaehaerys as weak, and some did until they met him. He encouraged all lords to speak freely and share their views on the problems of the realm and how they best be overcome. The lords would say about Jaehaerys that he is well-spoken, witty and well-humored. He laughs freely and often, even at himself, and he is the sort of king that any lord would be proud to kneel to. The young king had won the affection and admiration of many lords, both great and small. But Jaehaerys would not prove to be only well-humored and forgiving. He would also prove to be confident, strong and determined. His first major challenge was his marriage to his great love and sister Alicent. Now, despite its incestuous nature, the love and marriage between them was as great as love stories get. But of course his mother and Hand were afraid of a second uprising from the Fate Militant. So Jaehaerys and Alicent got secretly married on Dragonstone, where they would remain until Jaehaerys would come of age. And he would use these years to train every day in the courtyard to develop himself as a warrior, because he was aware of the shortcomings of his father, who was perceived as weak, and he was determined that no man would ever question his courage or skill in battle. At night, after training, he would be reading accounts on the reign of his grandfather Aegon the Conqueror in order to learn from him.
And a mind needs books like a sword needs a whetstone.
When Jaehaerys started ruling after his 16th name day, his first challenge was announcing his secret marriage to the realm. His hand and mother thought that he was afraid to announce the marriage to the realm and that he was even doubting it completely, but in reality he was more calculated. As is written in Fire and Blood, young or old, the king never acted without thinking. He had chosen the queen he wanted and had no intention of undoing it. He would let the realm know, but in a manner best calculated to lead to acceptance. So when his marriage went public, he sent forth septons and septas loyal to the crown to preach for Alicent's kindness and smart and gentle nature. He also introduced the doctrine of exceptionalism. The Targaryens had their roots in Old Valyria, not in Endelos, and for the blood of the dragon to marry siblings was not an abomination. And against all odds, this worked. Jaehaerys during his reign would make many royal progresses where he traveled throughout Westeros to see his people and for them to tell him about their problems and grievances. He did so, however, smarter than both his father and his grandfather. Aenys sent his heir and wife on a progress without their dragons, leaving them vulnerable to attacks from the Fate Militant. Aegon the Conqueror, however, would travel with a huge host, which would lead to other problems. Even the richest lord would oft find himself impoverished by the time the king departed, his wine cellars and larders empty and half his maidservants with bastards in their bellies.
You got fat.
Jaehaerys and Alicent would travel lighter with a small host to not upset the lords that they visited, but always with their dragons. Now, Jaehaerys' accomplishments during his reign are too numerous to discuss. Among other things, he improved the roads and later the sewers and drinking water of King's Landing. He restructured the laws of Westeros and rebuilt its economy after it was destroyed by the wars. And later in his life, he switched his focus from the roads of King's Landing to the roads of Westeros. The famous King's Road was created under his reign, and under advisement from his wife, he also abolished the right to the first night, preventing lords from legally raping girls on their wedding night. Jaehaerys was famous for his calm demeanor and even temper, but let it never be said that the Targaryen fire did not burn in his veins. When his master of coin was brutally murdered, the Night's Watch was no option for the murderers. They were disemboweled and hung from the Red Keep. Nobody saw him as weak like his father, but he was wise enough only to use force and only to use his dragons when necessary, and otherwise only show them as a threat. 10 years into his reign, it was said that Jaehaerys moved with an easy grace both on the dance floor and in the courtyard. His smile could warm the hearts of any maiden in the Seven Kingdoms, while his frown could make any man's blood run cold. The Seven Kingdoms were at peace and more prosperous than ever before, and I think what is most impressive about his reign is that he remained a great king for the entire 55 years of it, despite the hardships and losses that he suffered. Many a king has started out kind and ambitious, but let the power, challenges and hardships of the crown turn him or her bitter or cruel or even mad. Now the flip side of having a long and healthy reign is that you must see those younger than you suffer and die. Jaehaerys and Alicent had many children throughout their lives, but most of them did not survive them. Both his heirs would die before him, Aemon in battle and Balon due to sickness, and his firstborn daughter would also die during childhood, and another daughter while she was giving birth. All these events would both hurt Jaehaerys and Alicent. No mother should have to burn her child, and Maegor was cruel, but age is crueler, she would say in her later years. Jaehaerys was not one to brood and dwell in his pain, however. He would shrug his sorrows and plunge himself into the ruling of his realm. However, it was clear that all of his losses left the king sadder in the last years of his reign, and in the end his successor would not be his child, but his grandchild Viserys I, the son of Jaehaerys' second son Baelor. Rhaenys, the daughter of his first child Aemor, was skipped over. The reign of Jaehaerys I would be the longest and most peaceful and prosperous reign Westeros has ever known. However, at the end of his reign, the seeds for the Dance of Dragons 50 years later would already have been planted.